Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic Hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of Star Trek Discovery Season 5. It was called Whistle Speak. And as it starts, we find that the clue vial containing a fluid that Burnham thought would yield info as to where they need to go next to get the next clue is just a vial of distilled water. Kovich summons Michael to the Infinity Room and gives her a list of scientists whom he's discovered were among the ones who hid the clues, written on a real piece of paper from a real 21st century legal pad. From this list, in combination with the vial clue, Michael, Stamets, and Tilly are able to determine where they need to go to actually find the next clue, that this is a clue to a clue. Meanwhile, Dr. Culber spends time with a holographic version of his grandmother, and when he tries to get her help with what he's feeling since his weird experiences, she tells him that he needs to examine the body before he can examine the soul. Michael and Tilly beam down to the planet they were pointed to by the vial clue, far away from the only inhabited area on the planet so as not to make a spectacle of themselves and break the Prime Directive, since the society there is pre-warp and pre-industrial, and which often communicate by whistling. Culber enlists Stamets in taking a neural scan of himself. Michael and Tilly encounter an older lady among the inhabitants of the planet, and she's a bit unwell due to dust inhalation. They try to help the other locals save her without using their advanced tech so as not to break the Prime Directive, but they do talk about it right in front of her, and it then seems that her fellow locals are able to save her with their own methods. Michael and Tilly learn that they can only enter a tower on the planet, which they believe contains the next clue, which is disguised as a mountain, if one of them wins a race, granting them entrance. And I want to note here that this race is something that doesn't regularly happen. They bring about the event of the race by saying, hey, we want to get in the temple or the summit or whatever it is. And the locals say, well, you can only do that if we hold a race and you win. So it isn't something that was going to happen unless Michael brought it up and invoked, the tradition of allowing a race to be held when someone wants to get in the tower. Back aboard Discovery, Rayner refers to Adira as she when Michael calls up to Discovery to give an update on her progress after previously having called Adira they. It turns out that Discovery has found the tower to be damaged and in need of a reset if it's going to continue doing its job, which is to protect the inhabitants from dust storms by affecting the weather. And it will also need this reset if Discovery is going to be able to beam people into it, in case, I guess, Michael or Tilly don't win the race. Culber's neuroscan turns up nothing, much to his dissatisfaction. Before the race, all the runners and spectators simultaneously develop a cough. At one point, Michael, not Tilly, needs a rest and in fact drops out to chase a lead to a control panel for the tower. The race then comes down to Tilly and one of the locals. Finding the control panel, Michael has to rebuild his motherboard with instruction from Discovery to get it working again. At the last leg of the race, Tilly and the local are made to carry a bowl of water, and when the local drops hers and it's emptied, Tilly gives her some of her water so that she can continue in the race, even though Tilly knows she has to win. Doesn't make any sense. The control panel is reset as both Tilly and the local are allowed in the tower when the race is judged a tie, which might not have worked out, right? Because what if in the case of a tie, they drew straws and Tilly wasn't able to go in? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And there's a reason they let the other chick in as well as Tilly, and we'll get to that, but it's so contrived. Anyway, they get inside the tower, and it's obviously a mechanism and not a mountain, which is interesting because why disguise it as a mountain? In other words, they know it's a tower, and conveniently they think it's something from the gods. They don't think aliens, which, okay, that tracks. But if the society you're building it for has any chance whatsoever of getting into it, which you'd have to assume they're going to at some point, and can see that it's a mechanism, and will either know it's aliens or assume it's from the gods or previous civilization or whatever, why bother disguising it as a mountain? That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, it's at this point that Tilly learns that she and the local are getting locked in the tower as a sacrifice to the gods, such that the gods will allow rain to fall on the society there, which I guess they need, at least from time to time, if not constantly. And the sacrifice will occur when the machinations of the tower in seeding the atmosphere for rain has the effect of suffocating Tilly and the local, who, by the way, knew the whole time she was going in as a sacrifice. Okay. With the panel now working, Michael asks Discovery to beam her into the tower, which would break the Prime Directive, and apparently Discovery can do that, but they can't beam Tilly and the local out for lack of an ability to get a lock on them, even though communication is working between Tilly and Michael, which you would think wouldn't be the case if the transporter can't get a lock, because it would normally get a lock by honing in on the comm badge. So Michael reveals herself to the local person's father just outside the death chamber and spills the beans about who she is and whatnot to get him to let them out. But he thinks she's a crazed vision and still thinks the sacrifice needs to happen for rain to come. Tilly then gets the local person inside with her to hum a tune that her mom used to sing as a way to get her dad to let her live by opening the door, when Michael hears the tune over comms and repeats it. They get the door open, but a medical team is needed to help them resume breathing, so they beam in, and then Michael tells the locals' dad that her people can teach them how to maintain the tower so it won't fail again. But he's apparently still intent on having the community regularly sacrificing people, because he's like, oh, well, how am I going to explain this? We do these sacrifices, and the last time we thought about, maybe not doing that anymore, people flipped out because they think it's the only way the rain will come. So he's perfectly content to keep, thanks, but I don't know. We might have to still keep killing people, even though I now know that's not what brings the rain. Like, really? Okay. Tilly realizes the symbols on the wall of the tower are numbers, one of which is scratched on the side of the clue vial, and which denotes one of the other Danublian rain towers on another planet. The towers were built by Danublians to help these other cultures. Culber and Book talk about how Culber feels odd not being able to explore his malaise with Paul, since Paul doesn't seem to understand it. Before the episode ends, off screen, Discovery goes to Tower 5, which is presumably on another planet, and somehow Michael et al. Get into it and get the next clue before heading off to Malin Locke's next anticipated location for some reason. So essentially, last week they got a clue that pointed them not to the next clue for the location of the tech, but a clue to the location of the next clue to the location of the tech. And then they go to it completely off screen and just in exposition say, hey, we went and got it. Like, really? And why are they heading off to where Mal and Locke are? They're way ahead of them. They have clues that Mal and Locke don't have. Mal and Locke can't possibly find the tech at this point. So why are they bothering to go where they are? Like, what is the point of that? They're obviously not following Discovery, so they're not even because they don't have the vial. The vial never pointed them to this tower. They don't have the clue from the tower to point to the next tower that points to the next actual clue to the location of the tech. So why is what they're up to a concern at all? They're obviously not tracking Discovery, or they wouldn't be where they are as opposed to where Discovery was. So what? I don't understand that. Anyway, that was the end of the episode, and I just don't get it, people. Like, I really don't. This episode had the makings of a good story. They got off the ship. They met a new culture. They had a weird thing about them where they whistle when they're trying to communicate sometimes. But they only do it like at the beginning of the episode. It never comes up again. And the episode is named after it too, which is goofy. Like, why wasn't that explored? Why isn't that part of the episode? It's a cool idea. It's a cool thing that could have been something. They just abandon it. They come up with it and it's tacked on for like, I don't know, just a quirk, and it doesn't go anywhere. It's stupid. Anyway, not only that, but they talk about how, well, we need to sacrifice people to the gods in order to get the rain, because there's these dust storms, and gosh, we need rain, and we really should be sacrificing people, or we usually regularly sacrifice people to the tower. But then at the same time, the race only comes up because Michael says, hey, I'd like to get in the tower. And they go, oh, well, there's a way you can do that. We have this race. And the race is what leads to the sacrifice. So it's like, do they do this on a regular basis? And it's not something that needs to spontaneously come up in order for it to occur? Or is it something that only spontaneously comes up when someone says, hey, I'd like to get in there. Can we do the race thing? And that doesn't make any sense. Like, we sacrifice people to get it to rain, but not when we need rain, and not on any regular basis to ensure we always get rain, but whenever somebody says, hey, I'd like to go look in there. I guess they didn't want to have it seem like it was serendipitous that they showed up when this ritual was going to take place, but then what? It's like they come up with these episodes and they don't think it through, and then when it's done, they don't go back and polish it and revise it so that it makes sense. They just go with it. It's like, really? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. The other thing is, how did this massive tower get built by this Denoblian scientist and disguised as a mountain with no one seeing it go up? And who taught the first locals how to get into the tower? Because obviously they know how to get in, but didn't teach them how to maintain it. And why? Why? I don't understand. Because the plan would have to be to come back and clandestinely repair it from time to time, but apparently that wasn't done. But they at the same time didn't teach the locals how to do it because Michael says we'll teach you at the end. So like, what? That doesn't make any sense. I don't understand what's happening here. You know, like I said, they finally got off the ship after 2 episodes of being stuck on the ship or a ship, which is clearly done to save money because they had to spend money on this episode to shoot outside. And then the society that they come across and the whole prime directive thing is just like a footnote. Instead of having a serious issue about, pre-war, pre-industrial cultures and the prime directive and exploring the whistling thing and making it a rich cultural exploration, morality tale, they just put the barest flourishes of that or flashes of that into the episode almost in a token way, or definitely in a token way, while they're trying to tell this story of finding the clue. And that's not how Star Trek should be done. And that's why it's such a problem that this show is serialized instead of episodic. If it were episodic, the focus of this episode would have been this culture that they came up with, which was pretty cool. And this idea of a tower. And are they going to sacrifice people for the rain? And they would have explored that whole thing in depth instead of it being just the barest scaffolding and the slimmest amount of like story dressing around the main story, which was finding the stupid clue to the next clue. I, I just, it's sad. It's like I said, they come up with these episodes, they write them, and then they don't polish them. If they had polished them, first of all the things that didn't make sense would have made sense somehow, or they wouldn't have put them in there. And maybe they would have decided to make the story of this culture, this civilization, richer and more robust within the episode so as to make the episode about that and put the clue thing in the background. And it's crazy because they had the time to do it. And how did they spend that time? Culber and his crazy, I feel weird now storyline, which, maybe ultimately that will go somewhere. It's an exploration of the human condition, and that's great. That's what Star Trek does. But like, why did they have to, like, why couldn't they put those moments in a different episode? That's more like the ones they did in the last couple of weeks where they were stuck on a ship and they didn't have this rich culture they could have explored. Why did they waste time in this episode where they had a rich culture that they could have explored talking about Culber's malaise when that could get its own episode, or when they could have moved it to the next episode that they do where they're stuck on a ship? And it doesn't matter if they take time away from that plot, the way it mattered how they took time away from the plot of this episode that could have been deeper and richer. It's just really, really annoying that they don't understand how to do TV. They just don't get it. And the sad thing is we'll never hear from this culture again. Discovery's ending, and they're not going to, I don't think, bother to use them again in another series, Strange New Worlds, for example, because they just don't care. It's a throwaway. They came up with the barest bones of a culture that they could use in this episode as grist for the mill of telling the overarching story of the season. And they're never going to use them again. They won't even remember to use them again. They'll just create another disposable culture the next time they need one. And, I guess on the one hand, you could say, well, they don't want to retread and go back to the same planet, but why not? Why couldn't they build this into one of the key races of Star Trek like they've done so many times before with other races? It just boggles the mind. It really does. They had the great building blocks of something here, and they wasted it in the furtherance of the serialized story and the Culber malaise plot, which could have been explored in another episode where it wasn't so important to talk about what was happening in the main episode. And they just blew it, and it's terrible. But this show's always been bad. So I guess I'm not surprised. Anyway, I'm going to get out of here before I just keep repeating myself.
Just one more thing.
I will, of course, be back to do a breakdown and review of the next episode once it's released. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.